So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for the session hosted by AMO Services. My name is Rhonda Hobson, and I am facilitating today's session. We are together for 1.5 hours today, with the session finishing at 2:30. So welcome to our returning proponents, new proponents, and our wider audience. Next slide, please. We acknowledge that today we meet on many Aboriginal lands. For me today, that is the lands of the Dharawal people of Wollongong. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands, and we show our respect for elders, past and present, through thoughtful and collaborative approaches to our work. Next slide, please. AMO Services is an independent subsidiary of the Australian energy market operator AMO and is a key partner in the implementation of the New South Wales Government's electricity infrastructure roadmap through its appointment as the New South Wales Consumer Trustee. The focus of today's session is to provide information to assist proponents to participate in tender round 3 for generation and long duration storage. If you are new to our tender process and would like more information not covered in this presentation, please visit our website amoservices.com.au and read the tender guidelines. So the tender guidelines are a one-stop shop on the tender process and long-term energy service agreements, LTESAs, and is a comprehensive resource on AMO Services tender rounds. We also suggest the IIO report as another important resource. The report sets out a development pathway to meet New South Wales electricity needs for the next 20 years and a tender plan for the next decade, identifying the timing and scale for energy infrastructure investment. Joining me today from the AMO Services commercial team are Jack Krizat, Ernie Turner, Gina Zheng, and our GM of Commercial, Brad Hopkins. So the team have a mix of commercial, financial and energy backgrounds and have been involved in the design, implementation and assessment of our tenders. We are also joined by Marguerite Petit, who is our Commercial Stakeholder Relations Lead from AMO Services. Next slide, please. In today's session, we will outline AMO Services Tender Round 3 pack, which includes the recently published tender guidelines and supporting documents. Importantly, the session also provides an opportunity for you to ask questions to the AMO Services team to help deepen your understanding and to address any areas where you would like further clarification. In today's session, we will present some important tender information and we will be spending lots of time answering as many questions as we can. And so I'd like to walk you through the agenda for today. Firstly, we'll introduce tender round 3, generation and long duration storage LTESAs. Next, we will provide key focus areas to support preparation of high quality bids, and we will answer questions and provide clarifications. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of housekeeping, a few quick points you'll see up on the screen today. You've joined a Teams webinar call, so your microphone and camera should automatically be off. We ask that anyone please remain muted and with their cameras off for the duration of the webinar. We will also be recording today's webinar and we will publish it on the AMO Services website in the coming days. Now, if you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A button on your screen. It looks like 2 little speech bubbles with a question mark inside. And if you're interested in hearing the answer to a question that has already been asked, you can like the question by using the thumbs up function. In a moderated Q&A session, we'll make sure to prioritise those. There may be a delay in between typing your question and having it appear in the questions box. This is normal, so don't feel the need to ask your question again. It certainly will have come through. You can also mark yourself as anonymous if you would prefer your name not to appear in the Q&A channel. The chat on this Teams webinar has not been enabled, so you won't be able to use this function. But just a reminder as well, if you have a question, please use the Q&A function. The hands function won't be operating either. So I'll be pausing at different points in the session to answer questions coming through. And just finally, this presentation is for information purposes only. It is not intended to provide any advice. It is not intended to provide any recommendation or opinion constituting advice. Now I'd like to hand over to Jack to start our presentation.
Thanks, Rhonda. So I'll get started with a brief introduction of Tender Round 3. So Tender Round 3 is informed by the development pathway in the 2022 IIO report. This report outlines the development pathway for the next 20 years and the tender plan for the next decade. Tender 3 is our second tender for generation and long duration storage LTESAs and is now open, having launched on the 22nd of May. The tender guidelines, which are available on our website, are your first and best source for information about this tender, with other materials also available to support your bid in our tender pack. Our tender process is designed to support quality projects capable of delivering electricity infrastructure that is in the long-term financial interests of New South Wales electricity customers. This tender process has two key stages. The first stage is project bid, where proponents provide non-financial bids. Shortlisted proponents will then be invited to the second stage, which is the financial value bid stage. Next slide, please. So in this tender, we're seeking generation and long duration storage infrastructure. As such, the products available are generation and long duration storage LTESAs. This tender round is open to any proponent in New South Wales intending to connect to existing infrastructure. Proponents are required to demonstrate compliance with the project and proponent eligibility criteria. These can be found in the tender rules and tender guidelines, both of which are available in the tender pack on our website. Some of the eligibility criteria that applies to both generation and LDS infrastructure includes the project must have received SEARs and must be in receipt of a connection inquiry response. You must also submit a community engagement plan that will become binding upon award, and the project must not be identified as committed on or before the 14th of November 2019. For long duration storage, the project must consist of storage units with a registered capacity that can dispatch for at least 8 hours. And so AMO Services is also responsible for tendering access rights. Just to call out that CWO Res access rights will not be available as part of tender round 3. For proponents who are interested in CWO Res access rights, the pre-tender stage for this has kicked off. This will focus on coordination and alignment of network-related matters with the first-ranked network operator ahead of our Q4 2023 tender. So we will be offering CWO Res access rights in our Q4 2023 tender. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to provide an overview of the key dates for tender round 3. As I previously mentioned, the tender commenced on the 22nd of May and is currently open. The first step of the process, which I'd like to draw everyone's attention to, is registration. This is a quick and easy step to complete in the online portal that will then enable you to submit a project bid. Registrations will close on the 16th of June 2023, approximately 1 week before project bids close on the 25th of June 2023. The tender is a two-stage process that consists of responses to 7 merit criteria. 5 of these 7 are in the project bid stage and 2 are in the financial value bid stage. The course of the tender will play out over the remainder of 2023, with successful proponents currently expected to be announced in December. Next slide, please. So there's currently a suite of information available on our website for parties intending to participate. As mentioned, the tender guidelines are the best source of information, and I encourage everyone to familiarise themselves with these. Alongside this, we've also published our tender rules, the tender process deed, and guides to completing this and the returnable schedules. There's a market briefing available on social licence that may be a useful resource in addressing social licence merit criteria. You can also find our previously published market briefings on the financial value of generation and LDS projects on our website. In terms of project documents, we've published these in draft form. Alongside this, we've also uploaded compares of the project documents against those in tender round 1 for ease of comparison. And finally, a Q&A will open to registered proponents today, the 30th of May, and will be facilitated via our online portal. Next slide. So on to project bid stage. Our project bid stage covers 5 merit criteria encompassing technical, commercial, and social licence parameters. Land use consideration, which was previously its own merit criteria in Tender 1, has now been incorporated into MC6. So a brief overview of these. MC3 is intended to assess the project's impact on the New South Wales electricity system and any ability it may have to provide essential system services and or contribute to system strength. MC4 and 5 are intended to assess the pathway and progress towards developing the project and the capacity and capability of the proponent and their team to deliver the project. MC6 assesses any impacts of the project on the community and the approach towards minimising and offsetting these impacts. MC7 assesses the commitments and ability to improve regional economic development, including local supply chain, workforce, and First Nations participation. As I previously mentioned, a market briefing is available on our website that provides proponents with guidance on addressing MC 6 and 7 and completing the associated social license schedules. So projects who score highly in the project bid stage may make the project shortlist and be invited to submit a financial value bid, which I'll now move on to. Next slide. So the financial value bid stage is the second stage of this tender process and is likely to happen around August this year. In this, we assess the financial value as part of Merit Criteria 1 and Merit Criteria 2. For generation projects, there are 4 components of financial value, which are wholesale electricity costs and market benefits, portfolio impacts, net LTESA cost, and uncertainty. These components are calculated across multiple scenarios. We assess the wholesale electricity costs and market benefits using a predetermined relationship between additional megawatt hours of generation and wholesale price at a point in time. Additional generation is expected to result in a net benefit to New South Wales electricity customers, as a higher penetration of renewable energy generation is expected to result in lower wholesale prices in New South Wales. The net LTESA cost is an estimated cost impact on the scheme financial value incurred. Please refer to our previously published market briefings on financial value for Tender Round 1, and we will provide more information specific to this tender prior to the commencement of the financial value bid stage. The second merit criteria in the financial value bid is MC2, which assesses commercial departures to the project documents. We've published a draft template contracts for the generation and LDS LTESAs and the project development agreement as part of the tender pack. So we've consulted extensively with the market, including developers, investors, and advisors on the project documents prior to Tender Round 1. The template contracts for this tender are commercially the same as in Tender Round 1, with only minor amendments made. As I mentioned, we've published compare versions of these documents for proponents that are familiar with the Tender Round 1 documents. So finally, proponents are strongly encouraged not to propose material amendments to the project documents. Next slide, please. So the tender guidelines for Tender 3 contain some additional information and changes when compared with Tender 1. The additional points of guidance are on hybrid projects and projects that are staged and may have multiple connection points. There are also some updates on how we assess the reliability standard in regards to LDS projects. Proponents that select to bid hybrid projects should note that their project will be assessed against the merit criteria for both the generation and storage components, and successful proponents will be contractually committed to deliver all components of the project if they choose to bid in one. However, given the structure of the LTESA for hybrid projects, it will apply to the generation component only. The tender guidelines also include some further guidance for proponents that have staged projects and/or projects with multiple connection points. This aims to provide some guidance for proponents to decide how they will participate in a tender round, as well as how their project would be treated in the project documents. Finally, for LDS projects, an LDS project's capacity and location will be considered in their capability to reduce unserved energy events. This will be considered by us when developing the financial value shortlist. So we'll now be taking a short intermission from our presentation for some Q&A. I'll hand back over to Rhonda to facilitate this.
Sure. Thanks very much, Jack. So one of the questions coming through is the tender designed to support late stage development projects. So I might throw to you, Brad, maybe to talk to that.
Certainly, Rhonda, that's a good question. And we did, people will have noticed that during Tender 1, the projects that received LTESAs, some were late stage, some were earlier stage. There's a couple of points that I wanted to draw out here. Firstly, we do welcome projects at every stage, and so some people are using the LTESA to spur on their development activities, and they've reached a level of certainty around their procurement that allows them to bid effectively. And so what we look at through merit criteria 4 is what's the likelihood of that project being able to get to financial close and get to construction. And so if people can bring forward projects and outline a really compelling plan for how they will get that project to financial close, then absolutely early stage projects can receive LTESAs, and we're very supportive of those projects coming forward. And again, just reflecting on tender round one, like there were a number of projects that were up to a couple of years before financial close that were very close to receiving LTESAs. So it is certainly something we are keen to encourage. The only other point I wanted to make, Rhonda, was that we support projects irrespective of whether they are through financial close or whether they're built as well. So any project that wasn't committed at November 2019 is eligible to bid in the tender. And the reason we do that, so we face some criticism for doing that and questions on additionality. The reason that we do that, and it's really important, is that if we didn't make those projects eligible, then the market would have stopped and people would be waiting for our tenders before they progress with their projects through financial close. We felt that would be a pretty terrible outcome for consumers, and so what we said to the market, and it's in the New South Wales legislation, and we're applying that, is that get on and build your project. Use the wholesale contracts market, use the merchant market, and then you can come to our tenders whenever you're ready. If that's 2 years before financial close, that's fine. If you've got the financial capacity to progress your project and have it partly under construction, or in extreme case even commissioned, you're still very welcome in our tenders. And we've seen projects who negotiate with their debt providers to say, right, you fund our project through construction, and there's a review event, or there's something that encourages them to bid into the tender. So perhaps that's enough context on stage of project.
Thanks very much. I've got another question here, and I think it might be one for you, Ernie. So the question is around the Q4 tender. They're asking whether that will include both LTESAs and CWO res access rights, or is the intention that projects participate in this tender for LTESAs if required, and then follow up for the Q4 tender if they want access rights?
Yeah, thanks, Rhonda. So I think there's a few parts to that question. So the Q4 tender, that will be CWO access rights, and it will also be generation LTESAs. The Q4 tender is not anticipated to have LDS LTESAs. One of the eligibility criteria, which is based on regulation, is that a proponent must seek the access right and the LTESA in the same tender round. So for Q4 tenders, for the Q4 tender, proponent seeking a CWO access right should be bidding if they would like an LTESA, both for the LTESA and the access right in that tender round. Just on this tender round, so this tender is open to all of New South Wales, and that includes projects that are located within a renewable energy zone and outside of a renewable energy zone, connecting to existing transmission or distribution networks. So there would be examples of projects that are connecting into existing transmission or distribution inside a renewable zone that would be eligible in this tender round. And specifically for the CWO access rights, so that is projects seeking to receive an access right for CWO will need to participate in the tender that AEMO services run when that product is available in that tender.
Perfect. One further one for you, Brad. So is there any time limit to financial close from tender success?
There's no specific time limit, and so I think this sort of links back to the earlier question of projects sort of earlier in their development cycle. When should they bid for the tender? So there's no specific time limit, and as I mentioned, we did have very good projects that were up to 2 years from financial close in tender one. What you include in your bid submission is your targeted financial close date and then a long stop financial close date. So there are firm commitments that you will make as part of your tender that give rise to a time limit, but those are things that you set, and we assess those for credibility. So we look at your plan and say, is this project going to be able to deliver in line with its plan? In thinking that through, we'll look at we'll want to confirm that you've got all the land, so that you've got tenure over the project. We look at the planning permissions. We look at your progress through grid connection. That the credibility of propose. If it's clear that you've got a very long period of time to go and you're saying the period's relatively short, that will impact the credibility of your bid. And in doing that, we've got our own internal experts who have a lot of background in those in development of projects. We work with engineering firms to validate technical assumptions. We work with the NSPs to validate grid connection assumptions. So we really do a lot of detailed work to assess the sort of the credibility and likelihood of that plan. But to be specific, Rhonda, there's no absolute sort of requirement for a specific date that you have to hit financial close, but the date that you specify in your contract, you will be held to.
Great, thank you. One further question coming through: how are unserved energy requirements defined, and what examples can you offer to illustrate this? So I might ask you, Ernie, just to respond to this. It looks like we might have lost Brad.
If you can hear me, Rhonda, I'm happy to have a go at it.
Oh, good. Yes, please. Yes, sorry.
Yeah. And you please feel free to jump in. So when we think about the benefit of long duration storage, one of the things that is a real benefit of long duration storage is a reduction in unserved energy events. And so what we try and do is attribute a benefit to those projects through our financial analysis. And as Jack and Ernie mentioned, there's a detailed methodology for how we analyse the financial value of a project published on our website. So we look at the project's contribution to reducing unserved energy. We derive a value of unserved energy on a per megawatt hour basis from the AEMO ESU report, so the Electricity Statement of Opportunities report. And that tends to be a very big number. So it tends to be a number that corresponds to the value of lost load. And so the ESU will provide a number, and then we take that number, and then in looking at the characteristics of the project, perhaps the location of the project, we're able to derive an estimate of sort of the value of that project in contributing to a reduction in unserved energy. And through tender round one, it was interesting. Like that was the sort of the biggest sort of source of consumer value associated with long duration storage. So energy arbitrage and the wholesale market benefit of that was an important contributor, but the contribution to unserved energy was also very, very significant. Yeah, anything you'd like to add to that?
No, you covered it well, Brad. Thank you.
Andrew's just sent through another question. Was briefly, what is the process or consequence if a project falls behind schedule? What process will apply for mediation, etc., to allow some flexibility given supply chain and EPC constraints?
Yeah, good question. The LTESA document that we've published, that the successful proponents to the last tender did not amend. So that LTESA document is on our website, and it outlines in that contract, it outlines the process that you would go through if you failed to meet a milestone under the contract. And there's a couple of points that are worth highlighting. The first is that those dates that you submit as part of your tender, you will be held to those dates, and it's really important to the integrity of the tender that that we hold people to the dates that they bid, and that if you have been overly optimistic with your dates or misleading with your dates, that contract will terminate. So your LTESA will terminate. On the path to termination, there's a number of mitigants and methods that we use to support projects. So there's both a target date and a long stop date, and so there tends to be some period of time between those that are sort of, you can put this in your bid, but typically that's 12 to 18 months. So you create a buffer through your bid parameters. And then second, we have a cure plan, which is set out in the contract, where if there's something outside of your control, so there's a force majeure regime, those sorts of things are picked up. There's an extensive force majeure regime in the LTESA for change in law and for grid. So if those things cause a delay to your project, if there are things that are within your control, then there's a slightly different regime where you have to set out sort of exactly why it's happened and exactly how you're going to fix it. But I would say that compared to a typical government process, we probably have quite a high standard in terms of expecting that what you bid in the tender to be maintained throughout the contract, and it's really important for trust and integrity in our processes that we do that.
Right, thank you very much. I think we'll recommence the presentation. There'll be another opportunity for Q&A after the next section if you're still working through what you might be wanting to know from us. So I'll hand over to Gina.
Thanks, Rhonda. We're now going to spend some time diving into a few key topics that are relevant for proponents to provide a successful bid. Next slide, please. So what did a strong bid look like? What makes our tenders quite unique is that they are rolling tenders to be delivered consistently across the next 10 years. And this creates a unique opportunity for a two-way dialogue between ourselves and the market, enabling proponents to return to future rounds with more competitive bids. So to that effect, what did a strong bid look like? Well-performing bids provided detailed evidence and documentation to address information provided about their projects against each merit criteria. Successful bids also valued the LTESA option competitively and priced significantly below the project's LCOE, levelized cost of electricity, or levelized cost of storage for long-duration storage projects. Strong bids also made little to no commercial departures from the pro forma documents. This is an important point to make, as this reduces the risk to ASL and thus New South Wales consumers and provides a more efficient path to contracting. Finally, social license, community engagement, and local supply chain commitments are an incredibly important component of ASL's assessment, and strong bids provided meaningful outcomes in the communities that they operate in. We'll now do a quick deep dive into valuing the LTESA option competitively and social license. So next slide, please. So valuing an LTESA competitively. Competitively priced generation LTESAs featured an LTESA strike price that was below their project's levelized cost of energy. Projects also structured their bids with a contracted percent of less than 100%, and this supported them to perform well on financial value by reducing the net LTESA cost component of financial value, all else equal. This is because a lower contracted percent reduces the administrative costs of any given project and improves the financial value equivalent of the project overall. Very good bids also leveraged the bid parameters to tailor the efficient use of the LTESA to suit the needs of their project, and valued the benefits of the LTESA product as part of a holistic revenue strategy, including power purchase agreements and other merchant structures. Projects also submitted flat nominal bid prices, minimizing CPI exposure for ASL and thus consumers. For long duration storage LTESAs, projects provided an annuity cap that was below the levelized cost of storage. Successful projects also were able to oversize their project. This was for degradation purposes. However, it did favorably influence the financial value assessment, as the increased duration at the front end of the LTESA contract term improves the net benefit for the project. Again, accepted default contract terms and had minimal contract departures, which is a reflection of the acceptance of the risk allocation provided in the pro forma documents, and a validation of the contract template provided for long duration storage projects. Next slide, please. We are very committed to enabling proponents to achieve social license and meaningful outcomes for the communities that they operate in. So to this effect, we have two merit criterions that projects are assessed against, which look closely at a project's approach to community engagement and commitment to regional economic development. So merit criteria 6 looks at community engagement, shared benefits, and land use considerations. Our tip to proponents here is to tailor their commitments to offset the potential adverse community impacts of their projects. Merit criteria 7 is regional economic development and looks at stimulating local supply chain resources. Our tip to proponents here is to tailor their commitments to project characteristics, as we recognise that the opportunities for regional economic development will vary across projects and technology types. To enable and support proponents to achieve social license outcomes, we have prepared a number of resources that are all available online to support your project's development of social license. We have a market briefing available online that provides examples of good practice, behaviours, and improvements from our first tender with respect to how we ask for information. Our approach to social license is also heavily informed by the Renewable Energy Sector Board Plan and the OECC's First Nation guidelines, two bodies that are part of the roadmap family. We encourage proponents to look at these resources online and familiarise themselves with those documents. And finally, we've also quite streamlined how we ask for information from proponents regarding social license commitments. We ask proponents for their social license commitments via returnable schedules, and this is to support the streamlining of the contracting process, which segues nicely into the next slide, please. So social license is a really important element of our tendering process, and all social license commitments made by proponents during the project bid stage via these returnable schedules will be contractually incorporated into the relevant project documents. So both merit criteria 6 and 7, being the two social license merit criteria, do require a returnable schedule, and the contents of those returnable schedules will be transposed into a contractual schedule in the relevant project document for those projects that are successful. These commitments will then become binding and subject to ongoing contractual monitoring and enforcement regimes. And next slide, please. I'll now throw over to Ernie.
Thank you, Gina. So I will now discuss your tender experience, which is something I'm personally passionate about. So one of the key opportunities that we have at AEMO Services in delivering our part of the New South Wales roadmap is the ability to continually improve our tender process and to support the proponents like yourselves with this experience. So we're excited to see new proponents to this tender and also returning proponents who may have participated in tender round 1. So I'll now discuss some of the key improvements that we have implemented as part of this tender process. So this is the first tender that we may have returning proponents. So we have set up our process so that a returning proponent can access their previous submissions So this means as part of the preparation of your bid in the online portal, you will be able to have access to your previous responses and information that you provided. This will streamline your bid preparation and experience. We also heard feedback in Tender Round 1 from proponents that it would be great if more people could access the portal at the same time. So we have now built this functionality in the portal so that multiple users can collaborate in preparing their submission. Another improvement for this tender is to allow more time for proponents to prepare their project bid. So this tender, as you know, commenced on the 22nd of May, and the project's bids are due on the 25th of June. Lastly, we heard that you value ongoing communication, including face-to-face meetings, to support your understanding of the tender requirements, which I will discuss in a bit more detail on the next page, please. So yes, we've heard that the ongoing engagement is valued. So given the tender is now open, the first point of tender-related questions should first be directed to the Q&A portal, which will open today. Also, or you can ask your questions on this webinar. Responses to the Q&A will be issued periodically. There are also multiple other engagement opportunities, of which I will mention 3 today. First, at the end of the project bid stage, we do offer the opportunity to complete a satisfaction survey. We consider this feedback provided in that survey carefully, and so we encourage you to participate. Some of the feedback that we have previously received was the value of face-to-face meetings, including webinars like the one today. We also heard that more information on the social license commitments would be valued, and so we've provided their market briefings on that topic. Secondly, one thing we offer, which is quite unique, is we offer debriefs to all unsuccessful proponents at both the end of the project bid stage and at the end of the financial value bid stage. These briefings provide you tailored feedback on how your bid could be improved for future tenders, which gives you the ability to come back and compete on merit in future tenders. Lastly, we understand the value of face-to-face meetings like this in lots of different settings, and we're committed to continue to provide those opportunities and to support you to understand the tender requirements. So that concludes the formal presentation today. So I'll pass back to Rhonda for Q&A.
Sure. I think this first, the next question should be for you, Ernie. For the LDS tender, should you be able to provide at least 8 hours for 20 years?
Yeah, so good question. So without knowing the technology which is being spoken about, so the LTESA is technology agnostic. So for chemical batteries, the LTESA is contract is for up to 14 years. For pumped hydro projects, the LTESA is up to 40 years. And for other technologies, the LTESA is up to the lesser of the 40 years and the asset life. So in relation to the 8 hours, it will relate to the technology that you are putting forward, which will then be linked to the LTESA contract.
Perfect. And I think, Brad, this would be a good one for you to talk to. It has come up before. So in relation to MC7 regional economic development, what if we are unable to meet the baseline requirement? Local supply commitments, for example, using local steel, may materially impact the capex of our project bid and may affect the fixed price bid. How will this be considered during assessment?
Yep, that's a good question. So there's a few things to unpack there. So the first is that AEMO Services doesn't set the baseline requirements. So those are set by the Renewable Energy Sector Board, which is an entity set up by government. It's comprised of experts who work to make sure that the energy transition delivers benefits to a whole range of sort of different parts of society. So First Nations people, Australian workers, local industry, and local communities. And it's a really important part of the New South Wales roadmap, because as electricity sector people, if we don't deliver those broader community benefits, then we lose social license, and that causes real challenges for us all. So we take what the sector board says very, very seriously, and we expect bidders to also be very thoughtful about how they incorporate that into their bids. What we have to do, so that's the simple bit. Where it gets more complicated is that it's our job to balance cost to electricity consumers with the requirements of the sector board. So in our assessment, we balance those things. A key part of what we look at around those baseline requirements is what effort did the project go to in meeting those requirements. So in Tender 1, we had some projects bid, and it was very evident that they hadn't attempted to meet the requirements. So they hadn't sort of gone out and sought to either procure local content or to engage with local communities. And even if other aspects of those projects were really high quality, they were generally excluded from further assessment. So it's partly about the effort that you make to kind of go out and do the work that allows you to undertake that local content procurement. We also had projects that felt that local content, for example, steel was too expensive for their project. So we had people who demonstrated that to us in a few different ways. We had people submit a bid with a larger local steel component and a smaller local steel component, and provide information that allowed that to be considered. And then, really importantly, we had the successful projects and some of the highest scoring bids were able to meet those baseline requirements, and they were able to deliver both the requirements of the sector board and also really excellent outcomes for electricity consumers through lower strike prices. So we will be open-minded about how we assess that. We're looking for those markets to evolve and to grow over time. We know not every project can meet a local content requirement every tender, because there's just not enough supply in Australia to do that. And so we are realistic about those targets. But they are critically important, and the better proponents, both successful and unsuccessful in the last tender, have demonstrated that they are achievable targets as well. So that's really important.
Brilliant, thank you. Gina, I might pass this one on to you. So aside from returnable schedules, will AMO services accept and consider supporting documents like the IAPP document and community engagement strategy plan?
Yeah, so in addition to the returnable schedules, which is where we require proponents to outline the quantitative elements of their social license commitments, we will also ask proponents to separately provide written responses to outline the strategies and the robust approaches that they will adopt to deliver on those quantitative social license commitments. There is also an option to provide additional or optional attachments to further demonstrate a proponent or project's commitment to social license. And it should be noted that projects that demonstrate strategies and commitments that are project specific will perform stronger against the social license merit criterion.
Thanks. Another question coming in on the same theme is, there are baseline and stretch targets in MC7 for local supply. In MC6, there is an expectation. Is there an expectation of any baseline expectation or stretch target with respect to community spend per megawatt?
We don't set a sort of target as such for community spend. What we do is look at the quality of community outcomes in a project, and I think on this one, I'll point people to the social license briefing, and that has some really good examples in it that you can look at. And they were drawn from projects that we've been speaking to, and the community stuff is about going through the process with the community, figuring out what it is that that they need, and you can often have a very significant impact through being thoughtful rather than necessarily spending a lot of money. So I might pause on that one, Rhonda, and direct people to that market briefing note.
Perfect. Ernie, this may be one for you. It's a follow-up about the LDS tender. So the question is the 8-hour requirement at the first year or the final LTESA year, i.e. chemical battery will degrade significantly over 14 years. Is it a requirement for an 8-hour duration at year 14?
Yeah, thanks, Rhonda. So the requirement is throughout the LTESA contract. So yes, a chemical battery would significantly degrade over time. So there's sort of two options to, and there may be more options, I guess, to meet the requirement. One is as the battery degrades, you'll have to replace it, the degradation, to keep it above the 8 hours. Or another option could be to, I guess, oversize the storage component of the project on day one, and then have that profile degrade over time down to the 8 years at year 14. And so there may be other options available, but the requirement is to have the 8 hours of storage over the contract term of the LTESA.
Perfect. One of the questions coming through, Brad, was just about access rights, that they were expected to be available for this tender, but now they've been pushed out. I don't know if you wanted to expand on anything you've already discussed on that.
Yeah, certainly. So what Energy Co has commenced is a pre-tender stage where for those seeking connection to the new infrastructure in the CWO res that requires access rights, you as a proponent can register with Energy Co, and then you can work with the network operator, so the new network operator that was only very recently appointed, to establish the parameters that you need to bid successfully in a tender. And what we decided with Energy Co was that, given that the network operator was only very recently appointed, and so the technical and physical parameters of the res have only recently been landed, that it would benefit the competitive process in the tender for proponents to have more time to work with the network operator on finalising, and then they can come back and bid for access rights and LTESA in a subsequent tender. So that was the rationale and the reason. So if you've just had a network operator appointed, there's work required between the network operator and proponents, and that ultimately benefits you as proponents, because it means you can show up to the next tender with a more comprehensive and considered bid.
Brilliant. I've just got one here. I'm not sure, it may be for yourself or Ernie. I can see some time allowance to achieve financial close. Is there an allowance for a new LDS technology to be given time to finalise its technical performance verification?
So with all of the technologies that we have in the tender, we're focused on technologies that have already been proven at an appropriate scale. So we are open to new technologies, but it's not an innovation program as such. So what we're focused on is technologies that are going to deliver long duration storage at the lowest cost and risk to New South Wales consumers. So in that sense, it's very different to say something like ARENA might do, where they're more interested in do an amazing job, like supporting new technologies, sort of going through earlier stages of their evolution. So that said, there's that we've seen compressed air, flow batteries, like some of these technologies that are technically proven, but need commercial support. And so those technologies we absolutely welcome in our tender. If there is a sort of a commissioning period, if you like, then that's obviously fine. So all technologies require a commissioning period, but we would be less amenable to a period where there was a technology had to prove that it worked before. So the LTESA is not intended to accommodate technologies at that early stage.
Okay, great.
And if I've missed the point on that question, please feel free to ask a follow-up.
Okay. This may be for you as well. Can the project's energy capacity contracted under LTESA, can it be later contracted with a corporate user under a PPA?
Yes, absolutely. So the reason that we have gone with this rather complex, sophisticated option structure that was unfamiliar to the market is purely for the reason that we want you to use this as insurance. And so if you sign an LTESA, it is a fallback for you, and you can go out and aggressively participate in the wholesale contracts market, whether you're a generation project or a long duration storage project. And indeed, some of the projects that were successful in tender one, they showed up with PPAs, and so they had intended to sign those PPAs immediately. So they might have a PPA for part of their project and an LTESA for part of their project. They might sign a higher value PPA with a low credit quality counterparty, because they know that if that counterparty goes bust, they can still fall back on their LTESA. And so the LTESA is designed to sit right next to, at the same time, sit right next to a PPA. So absolutely, one of the policy objectives is to support and make the wholesale contracts market deeper.
Perfect. A question coming through from Emmanuel. How will transmission congestion planned to be overcome, even with the HumeLink and Energy Connect line upgrades?
That I think is a system planning challenge, and so you would have seen that we've published a report called the IAO report, which sets out a long-term plan for both transmission upgrades and for tenders. In that plan, there's a series of upgrades that are outlined that either mirror or augment the AEMO ISP. And I think that in Australia, the transmission build out and transmission congestion will be a core problem that we'll be seeking to solve for many years to come. And the two projects mentioned in that question are both in the southwest of New South Wales. Those, I think there'll be sort of a need for sort of further augmentation of those lines in future to pick up on some of the resources in those regions. I would also direct people to the distribution networks. So there's been a sort of lesser focus on distribution networks from developers, but some of the metrics that we're hearing from the DNSPs are that they've got significant capacity. They've got a strong willingness to host new large scale generation and storage, and we think there's a great opportunity there for developers to engage with DNSPs on the areas in their networks where they've got capacity. And the DNSPs have been doing a huge amount of work and quite innovative work on unlocking capacity in their networks.
Okay, great. Look, I'm just waiting for the question to come through. Sorry, there's a little bit of a lag. If you have questions post this session, we're more than happy to take them. I'll go through shortly how you can get in contact with us. Here's the questions come through. So how can we confidently commit to social licence commitments at the project bid stage if our project is at a relatively early stage? For example, we don't know what terms our EPC contractor would accept in relation to local content.
That's a great question. So what we have seen is people commit to targets in their LTESA, even though they're still stepping through procurement, and then you accept that as a risk in your EPC procurement. And so people may have come to the tender, bid a target. So remember, the targets are a percentage of locally sourced or locally available steel products. So it's not all of the steel. So for example, it's there has to be a local market for that product. They might have consulted with a range of EPC contractors. They might have engaged a local procurement expert. So there's people out there who just focus on local content supply, and based on all of that information and work, they've established a level that they're comfortable with committing to in the LTESA. And then obviously, as your procurement progresses, and if you sign an EPC contract sort of the day before financial close, which might be sort of, as I said, sort of 2 years away, then you need to work within the parameters that you bid and thought about as part of your bid.
Great. Another question, would an offshore wind project meet eligibility criteria if the connection point is inside New South Wales, whilst the project would technically be located in Commonwealth waters, i.e. outside New South Wales?
Against that parameter, like, yes, we would be able to ensure your eligibility based on that requirement, and we are enthusiastic about having offshore wind in future tenders. So absolutely, offshore wind will be eligible in our tenders in time. I don't think there would be an offshore wind project that was sufficiently progressed to allow it to meet our basic eligibility criteria. Excluding that question of geographical eligibility, which I think would be fine. Some of the criteria relating to SEERs, so are you in the planning system? Do you understand your planning requirements? Like, have you thought about your planning requirements? That's that basic eligibility criteria. So offshore wind projects may not have progressed to that point where they're sort of in the planning process, but hopefully soon in future tenders we will be welcoming offshore wind as a technology.
Perfect. So that looks like it's brought us to the end of the questions coming through. So thank you to everybody for attending and to the team for presenting. Just to note that AMOS Services is committing to ongoing consultation with our stakeholders. So please make sure that you subscribe for the updates on the website and submit questions and provide feedback at any time to our stakeholder engagement team at stakeholderengagement@amosservices.com.au. And just a reminder that registered proponents participating in tender round 3 should submit their clarification questions via our online platform, and you will have received instructions on how to do this for the formal Q&A process. The formal Q&A process opens today for registered proponents. So once again, thanks to everybody for attending, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.